You filled my car as well, right?
So, I appreciate you guys coming out on a Saturday, especially some of you guys who just survived camp. Got a couple of people walking in, I'm gonna wait.
Scare when you can.
It's a TT. You're being recorded.
I'm not gonna say they're gonna have to go I drove this morning. Anyway. I just let that walk through the room. There we go. We're gonna spend a session, the lunch and another session, and then 2 presentations, Lord willing, tomorrow. If in the middle of this, I start chasing a rabbit and it's not relevant, just say, hey, let's go back and talk about this. Or if there's questions, then, I like this to be interactive. I do this for a living. And so I get to talking about it, and I just keep going. So I'm going to try to watch this clock and to make sure that we quit on time and have some time for some interaction. And you're not going to interrupt my flow if you ask about anything or whatever. Now, the last time I was here, it snowed. I met David Shannon in Coleman, and we rode down together for your youth rally. The last time I was in this building, and the last time I was in Tuscaloosa, I was in a 3-day tactical rope class, training with the sheriff's department to play around with ropes on the sides of buildings and things. So that's my exposure to Tuscaloosa. I've been a minister in some capacity since 1980. I started out working with John Rice in a little church in Anniston, Alabama, and he gives me credit for naming that camp you guys just got back from. But in '98, I went into private practice as a therapist. When I moved to Huntsville, there were 12 high schools in my youth group. I came from a small church in North Arkansas. When I got to Huntsville, there were 12 different high schools there, and there were girls that cut. There were girls with eating disorders. There were boys that had addiction problems. There were blended families, and I was unqualified to minister to them in that area. Bible teaching I could do, that I couldn't. So I asked the elders if instead of going to youth ministry workshops, I could study psychology. And so that turned into a master's. And the young man that I was rock climbing with, a kid named Steve Culpepper, was a Nazarene. He wouldn't even remember the church, but he was a local kid who knew where the rocks were. So we climbed together. And my master's studies interfered with our climbing quite a bit. And out on a rock one day, he said, well, what are you going to do with this high-powered degree when you finish it? And I said, well, at some point, I'd like to move it into a license as a therapist. And he goes, well, my dad happens to do that. He's a state supervisor for licensing, and he'd like to do that for you since we climb together. And so my ability to be a licensed professional counselor was just laid in my lap. He wrote a supervision plan that allowed me to do that and not leave the church for my employment. And so I've been in private practice about 26 years. It's a small private practice and a consulting business. I teach de-escalation for corporations. I'm a trainer at the police department. I've been a chaplain assigned to their SWAT team for 33 years. And so I do a lot of de-escalation training, crisis intervention, communication stuff with them. My wife and I have been married 40 years. We have 1 adult daughter, 3 grandkids, and 2 Spanish water dogs. And she's a retired school teacher. And so I don't know if there's anything else that you need to know. I have a lot of hobbies. My hobby's collecting hobbies, so if you want to know, we can talk about some of that. I start out with relationship conversations with an assumption. And this may not be an assumption that anybody in the room endorses. Your elders may disagree with it. Your ministers may disagree with it. I could not defend it in a debate with Kyle Butt or Ralph Gilmore, but I'm going to assume, just simply because of the business I'm in, that when we talk about relationships, everything in the New Testament assumes that we're under the bell curve of normalcy.
Under the what now?
Under the bell curve of normalcy. So I've got an imperfect person who's married to an imperfect person, and when you put those 2 people together, guess what kind of marriage you get? Well, that'd be an imperfect relationship. I've got an imperfect person and I'm promote him or install him as an elder. Guess what kind of elder I get? An imperfect elder. I get a bunch of imperfect people and they come together as a congregation. Guess what you get? An imperfect congregation. Relationship principles in the Bible talk about healthy people. They may be immature, they may be unsophisticated, they may be selfish, but the Bible talks about healthy people trying to work things out. I don't believe it talks about a sociopath, a psychopath, a clinical narcissist, someone with a personality disorder like borderline personality disorder or something like that. The New Testament didn't, I don't think the New Testament assumed those relationships because those relationships will not last anyway. So why put the burden on the believer to do that? God will only hold you accountable for that which you are responsible. A 26-year-old kid with Down syndrome doesn't have to worry about his salvation. A 95-year-old guy with Alzheimer's disease can shoplift from Walmart and cuss like a sailor. He'd probably go into heaven if he was attending the church before his brain turned to a sponge. And so I think a lot of times we talk about marriage stuff and we find hurting people and suffering people and abused people, and they're in relationships like this, and we read passages like submit to one another, suffer for doing good, and the one person in the room that needs to ignore that is the one person that takes it home with them. I'm talking about two healthy people that are flawed under the bell curve of what God would consider normalcy for us to talk about our relationships. If you don't fit into that, some of the things we say, and you need to talk to me about that, that's not the kind of discussion we have in public. That's not where we stop the whole seminar to talk about the exception to the rule. Does that make sense? And probably a private discussion with me here is probably not going to one session. That's a trip to Huntsville at my office there. So that's kind of my rules of engagement. And some of the things you ask, I have the right to say I don't know, and you don't either. All right. So we'll go from there. Is that comfortable with everybody? Okay, this means yes. This means no. This means you got back from camp. So when you attend any workshop, you're either going to get information or confirmation. I'm either going, hey, I didn't know this. Wow, this is new stuff. Or, hey, the stuff I've been doing works. So in this seminar or in this discussions, you're going to look at some things and say, hey, this is something we've already been doing and keep on keeping on, or this is something I hadn't considered. So I like to start out with kind of an analysis of just you. And so you're going to be in one of several places in your relationships. The first place you start out is when you start in a relationship, is this thing we call romance. Everybody been there? Bambi gets Twitter-pated, right? There's a state here where you're in love with being in love. It's called limerence. A lot of affairs take place simply because of the idea of limerence. In romance, everything's beautiful. Everything's wonderful. Everybody's perfect. You see the red flags, you just call them different colors. Okay? In romance, she describes her boyfriend as he's a foreign national. He's unencumbered by the mores of a capitalistic society. So like Hallmark movie, doesn't it? Just beautiful stuff. Well, at some point, that heart turns into a big zero because romance runs into reality. The promise encounters its first problem. And reality is when you realize that, hey, Prince Charming rides a white horse, and those things have to be fed hay. You have to muck out the stall and they'll poop in the house. A guy who wears armor full-time smells under that armor. And when he takes it off, he may be bald. He may have a hairy chest, whatever. But we go from this ideal to, hey, I'm an imperfect person. I married an imperfect person. What I do when an imperfect person lives up to their capacity for imperfection. So he's a foreign national, unencumbered by the mores of a capitalistic society. Right here, he's an illegal alien and he's unemployed. Okay, that's what happens there. You run into the reality. So you may be here, newly married, not been married very long, and you may still be there waiting for this to happen. When this happens, you're in reality. You can recycle which is a lot of people do, especially when you're dating, you get on this treadmill a lot. Oh, he's not perfect. He's not whatever. He's not what I expected. She's not what I expected. Sometimes this happens in marriages. The divorce rate never reached 50%. That's a myth. They projected that we'd have 50% divorce rate in our country, and that's just one of those myths. It probably never got past 45. But, 4 out of 10 marriages say, hey, this isn't what I signed up for, and they recycle. The other response you can have to reality is you have this thing we call resentment. This is the one that I'm most scared of, because somebody says, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, my marriage is a 5, and I'm just going to suck it up and deal with 5. And they're just miserable. We're going to stay together for the kids. Well, you're teaching your kids how to be dysfunctional. You're teaching your kids how to be disingenuous. You're teaching your kids how to be dishonest. And children are most influenced not by the relationship between dad and son, or dad and daughter, mom and son, mom and daughter. Children model how they see dad treat mom and how they treat mom treat dad. And if you want to go a deep dive into that, I can look at the dynamic between mom and dad and tell you things about transgender, tell you things about addicted kids, tell you things about kids that deal with pornography and kids that deal with same-sex attraction. Without chasing too big of a rabbit, I believe in a thing called a social contagion or a psychological contagion. It's where we decide, hey, this type of behavior works for somebody else and we'll mimic it. And it's easier to spread now because of social media. I've got a little bitty podcast, Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure, and I've got an episode where I talk about the transgender phenomenon. But before I ever met anybody, and by the way, that's less than 1% of the population of the entire world that's ever been transgender. Okay? There's Klinefelter syndrome, where you get an extra chromosome. There's Turner syndrome, where you get an extra X chromosome. And then there's intersex. Those are the 3 medical conditions that produce a transgender person. And then there's a psychological condition, which is called gender dysphoria. Less than 1% of the population. So there's not 4 of them at your high school. There's not 3 of them in your daughter's homeroom. It's a psychological contagion. As a therapist who's been in private practice 26 years and a guy who's been in ministry 40 years, if you go back 15 years ago, our kids weren't struggling with transgender, everybody was gay. And 20 years ago, they weren't gay, they were goth. And 25 years ago, they weren't gay or goth, they were cutting. And 30 years ago, they were anorexia and bulimia. And it's this type family, this dynamic of hyper-controlling, over-rigid, embedded, enmeshed, or no rules at all, that type family that you see is a phenomenon that these children spring from. It's not a causal relationship, but it's correlation. Does that make sense? So you get here and it's just, hey, this is terrible, it's never gonna be good, and I'm just gonna deal with it. That's horrible. That's a horrible way to think. That's a horrible way to live. Now, you may have to come to some reality. My wife compromised on tall, dark, and handsome. She just that went out the door. Okay? And so she understands, I looked my best 30 years ago. It ain't gonna get no better, people. The human body does not improve with age. There's some things. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, where's your relationship? Well, what's my potential? Physical fitness wise. I'm 62 years old. I've had 15 abdominal surgeries. A lot of stuff falling apart for me. On a scale of 1 to 10, my physical fitness is a 6.5. My scale only goes to 7. It don't go to 10. So I'm knocking a home run today. Well, sometimes you have to look at, what you brought to the table. That's your baggage, your trauma, your family of origin, your ability for sophistication. A lot of things there. And it may be, that you just don't make peace with that. But you say, hey, can we get the potential out of this relationship that we've got? Does that make sense? So you can recycle you and do resentment, or you can reinvest or renovate. And that's where skill building comes into. That's where we go over here and we start looking at what can we do to change who we are. And so we're going to basically talk about a stack of things that you need to do, that I need to do for our relationships to get the most out of it. And so, you guys remember this pyramid they taught us in school about nutrition? You guys remember that thing? By the way, they've come out lately in nutritional studies and said that was the worst model for nutrition that was ever invented. Now, if you're a fifth grader and you can draw a triangle with two sides like that, that's $1 a piece. I've got a minor in art. I learned to be a mercenary cartoonist at the early age of the fifth grade because you can. Hey, you guys got to do that help poster? Yeah, I draw one of those. Really? You can? Yeah, it'll cost you $1. Anyway, so I don't remember what the food thing was: pizza, ice cream, spaghetti, and French fries. I don't remember what that was. But we're going to use this for hours. The very top capstone of this is going to be love, and love is going to be an intention or an attitude. Love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. That's the first part of our definition. I wish I had invented this definition, but I stole it. Love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. It involves two things, and this is a principle I'm finding in the New Testament everywhere. My wife calls it my latest rabbit hole. But there's two principles in the New Testament. There's the as if, and there's the even though. And those are the two things that dictate my behavior. Love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into your good. I'm going to treat you as if you're more important than me. I'm going to treat you as if your needs come before my rights. We'll visit this later. I'm going to treat you as if you're forgiven. I'm going to treat you as if I love you. I'm going to treat you as if I respect you. Doesn't mean I have to feel it. I'm not being fake. I'm not being duplicitous. I'm being intentional. I'm walking into this situation and I know that in order for us to work, I can't control your behavior, so I'm going to control mine. And I'm going to approach you as if you're the most important, as if I love you. Now, what would that do? We stop right here and said, everybody go home and just change your mindset, click a switch and say, even though I'm still hurt, even though I'm still mad, even though I'm still angry, I'm going to treat this person as if I forgave them. What would that look like? And I don't care what they've done. It may still hurt and you may not feel like forgiving them. But if I just treated you as if there was no unfinished business between us, if you did that with your in-laws, if you did that with the president of the HOA, you know, the people who are Tennessee fans treat their team this way all the time. We act like as if they're good, as if they're going to win a championship, whatever. Anyway, we talk about delusions in a deeper topic. Okay, so love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment to the good of another. Second part, it does not require reciprocity or return of investment. I don't love you because you love me. I love you because I've chosen to, and if you reciprocate it, that's great, fantastic things will happen. If you don't reciprocate it and I still choose to love you, I'm going to do that. So it doesn't wait on return of investment, right? Reciprocity, and it's not necessary that the person be deserving it. So I'm going to treat you as if, and I'm also going to treat you even though. Your behavior doesn't dictate my behavior, your attitude doesn't dictate my attitude. I get to choose intentionally how I'm going to treat you. So love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. It does not require reciprocity, and it's not contingent on you being deserving. It is locked into the as if and the even though principle. And so that's the top part. Now, you can't probably have that as easy. You can have it without the bottom three. But if you get the bottom three, it's easier, it's organic, it's why, as Americans, we don't live in arranged marriages. We get to go out and shop and pick and do what we want to. And then we build this foundation to get to there. In the Middle East, in the New Testament times, everything Paul wrote to people and Peter wrote to people that being married to people probably in arranged marriages. You didn't get to pick. Now, in our culture, if you were test driving one and you said, this is terrible, and you married them, that may be a special kind of stupid. I'm not real sure. But in the Middle East, when they do the domestic code, when they talk about husbands and wives, parents and children, masters and servants, the Roman world knew about that code, but they would not have done it like the apostles did. Because they said, hey, when you get into this situation, you treat your master as if he's Christ. It doesn't say that slavery is okay. He said, but if you ended up being a slave, you treat your master like he's your boss. And if you end up being a boss, you treat your servant as somebody who deserves being treated like Christ would. Husbands and wives, wives and husbands, parents and children, slaves and masters, masters and slaves. Really interesting because they changed the idea. In the Roman culture, the Romans were more concerned about shame and disrespect. And then when Christianity showed up, they said, no, you make the decisions you make about pleasing a deity. And the Roman mindset about serving the Caesar and serving the legions, serving the state. Man, if I could live my life with a code that served God, that was revolutionary in the first century. That's why it took over. But that's where we get to. But now, in our society, we don't start here, we start down here because of just the way our society is. But the second layer here is intimacy. Now, what's intimacy? So go to Matthew chapter 19. In the New Testament world, you had several different groups of people. I leave out the Herodians in this discussion because they're kind of minor players. But in the New Testament world, you had the Zealots, and the Zealots were kind of your concealed carry Jews. Okay, they were the guys who wanted the Messiah to come and kick out the Romans, and the Messiah was going to be this military leader. On Palm Monday, or Palm Sunday, depending on how you read the Gospel of John, when Jesus is riding into town, side saddle on a colt, a symbol from the Old Testament that I'm a king, I'm coming in peace. You got the streets lined with people, and they're dropping palm fronds and they're yelling, Hosanna, Hosanna. Well, Hosanna we use as a praise term. In the New Testament, it meant save. Save now. They're yelling, let's roll, when Jesus comes into town on the weekend prior to Passover. Because Passover was when they got liberation from the Egyptians. And they're wanting the Messiah to start a war. And so that was your Zealots. They're the reason Jerusalem gets destroyed in 70 AD, because they go down and they take out a Roman fortress and they kill everybody there. And the Caesar says, I'm going to go stomp this hornet's nest out. And they march against Jerusalem and devastate. But that was your Zealot. Then you have what I call the Amish Jews. You have the ascetic Jews. They were Throwback Thursdays. They didn't want their kids to speak Greek. They didn't want them to read the Septuagint. They lived probably outside of Jerusalem in a little community called Qumran. They're the people who preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls for us. We got a copy of the book of Isaiah, 1,500 years older than any copy we've ever had, and there might have been 4 letter differences, not word differences, but letter differences, because these people were meticulous in preserving the Hebrew or the Aramaic, and we think John the Baptizer was probably part of this community because he's rocking that old school garb, the camel's hair and the leather girdle. Really, really strict ascetic group. If you wanted to be part of their group, you had to kind of sign a contract, and you couldn't have contact with females for 2 years before you were initiated into the group. They're super, super strict, and they're really, looking at the old ways. And then you have a group of guys called the Sadducees. The Sadducees believed that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy were inspired. They didn't think the rest of the Old Testament was. They didn't believe in angels or demons or the resurrection. They thought that once you died, you were dead. And so they believed that wealth meant righteousness and righteousness meant wealth. They controlled the temple treasury, and they bought and they sold the high priesthood from the Romans. And that's a group of people in the New Testament world. And then you have this group of guys called the Pharisees. The Pharisees were interesting because they'd made a break from mainline Judaism because one of the high priest's mother had spent time in a Roman prison. And he said, there's no way a lady spends time in a Roman prison and doesn't get raped. So he's not a pure-blooded Jew. We're not going to follow him. So they rejected that, and they began to do a strict observation of the technical parts of the law. So when you get into the intertestamental period, the end of the book of Nehemiah to the beginning of the book of Matthew, that 400 years, they began to elevate interpretation of the law over God. And so they started looking at these minutiae. The oral tradition that came out of that is in a book called the Mishnah. It had 800 interpretations of the basic law of God. Now, the copy I have was translated from Hebrew to German and from German to English. So when you read it, it sounds like Jedi Master Yoda wrote it. There's a chapter on the Sabbath called Goings Ins and Comings Outs. and so, but they believe Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy were inspired. They believed that the wisdom literature was inspired. They believed the prophets were inspired, and because of the Mishradah, because of this tradition, they believed the sayings of the rabbis were inspired. So I'm a rabbi, I'm a teacher, and I opine on this. Ding! It came from God. It had the same weight as the Torah. It has the same weight as the Talmud. So you get to Matthew 19. It came to pass when Jesus finished these sayings that he departed from Galilee and came to the regions of Judea. A great multitude followed him and healed them there. The Pharisees, this group, the Pharisees came along testing him. This is a disingenuous question. They don't want a real answer. They just want to know where he's at. They came and gave him a test and said, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? Now, if you're reading King James, New King James, American Standard Version, you notice the word just is italicized. Anytime you see an italicized word in those translations, it's been added by the translators. It's not in the Greek. It doesn't exist. The translators are turning this verse into a dynamic equivalent. They want you to know what they meant by this question. They're not asking you, is there any reason for a guy to divorce? They're asking you, is can you divorce your wife for just any reason? Now, the reason they're asking that is in the New Testament times, you've got two rabbis. Anybody here watch The Chosen?
Yes.
How many times have you heard the names Shammai and Hillel? Those were the two guys. One of those guys took the passage in Deuteronomy and it says, if a man marries a wife and she displeases him for some unclean reason, he may divorce her. One of those rabbis said, look, the Bible says if you marry somebody and she displeases you, romance turns reality. You can recycle. If she colors her hair, she gains weight, she burns the biscuits, if she shops too much on the Visa card, whatever. If there's any reason that she displeases you, you can divorce her. The other rabbi said, no. What the law says, if you marry a woman and she displeases you for some unclean reason, sexual immorality. Now that's not adultery, because if she committed adultery in the Old Testament, what happened to her? They just killed her. So this is, did you find out she was unchaste as a child? Did you find out she was promiscuous as a teenager? Did you find out that her father had used her in prostitution? Did you find out she wasn't a virgin? And so you've got these two. One guy says, hey, you marry, divorce, and remarry anytime you want to. This other guy says, only way you break this marriage is if she's guilty of some unclean, some immorality reason. And they're asking Jesus, pick a camp. Now, do they care what Jesus picks? No. Because when he chooses Shemaiah, guess who he just lost? The Hillel followers. If he chooses Hillel, guess who he just lost? The Shemaiah followers. Now, if you need to remember who is conservative and who is liberal, Shemaiah was the conservative guy, and Hillel was the liberal guy, because that's where he was going, straight to Hillel. But anyway, it helped me pass the test. Don't judge me. My mind is weak. I have to do things like that. So they asked Jesus, pick a camp. What does the Bible say? What do you believe this is about? And Jesus said, have you not read? And he's going to quote the Pentateuch, the 5 tools, the group that both people believes is inspired. Not, I agree with Shemaiah, I agree with Hillel. Have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said to them, for this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother, be joined to his wife, and two shall become one. So then they're no longer two but one. Therefore what God has joined together, let not man separate. Jesus says, here's your ideal. You don't tear something apart that God put together. And notice that biblical math is not 1 + 1 = 2. It's 2 = 1. That's intimacy. So when you first start a relationship with somebody, this is me, and this is my defenses, this is my circle, this is my walls, this is my barriers. And then I meet my wife, and she's got those secrets and those things up. And we spend time together, and we talk, and those walls start to disappear as we start talking to each other and learning more about each other. And then eventually those walls separate, and then eventually there's no walls at all, and two become one. That's intimacy. Do you have the same worldview? Do you have the same problem-solving method? Do you have the same basic values? Are you politically compatible? Are you recreationally compatible? Does sunset speak to her and you ignore them? That's not going to work. I tell the younger generation, if she can't tell the difference between Star Trek and Star Wars, it's probably not going to work. Okay, that kind of stuff. But it's the idea of, do we have the same worldview, same meaning of life, have the shared goals, and the same problem-solving style, and the same mythos? If you share those things, if this is you and this is me, to the degree that we have this overlap, we've got a strong, healthy, compatible relationship. Now, that didn't happen in the first century because they were just put together. But if you were put together and said, hey, this is important to my wife. She likes flowers. She likes sunset. She likes to go back to Galilee where she's from. This is important to my husband. He likes to talk about the Roman chariot races and he's into. You would start sharing these things, and this intimacy, this connectedness would start the as if and even though mechanism, and then love becomes an intentional thing. That make sense? Now, you can't have this without this. And this is maybe one of the most misunderstood words in the human language. How do you choose who you trust? How do you become a person of trust? I go into a room, I want people to trust me. I go into a business relationship, I want people to trust me. I start a friendship with somebody, I want people to trust me. How do you choose who you trust? Now, all of us have people we trust, right? And all of us have people that trust us, I hope. But have you ever really thought about defining this word without using that word? You ask your people, how do you know you can trust somebody?
Past.
Pardon?
Their past.
Their past. Okay, I look at how many times I've been able to trust them. So we're using the word again to define it. How do you choose who you trust?
Character.
Character deals with their past, how they behaved in the past. And everything you're saying is 100% right. But there's this little thing that's missing that I didn't know for a long, long time. Started out as a young therapist. A couple come to the office. He's talked to somebody on Facebook he shouldn't talk to. She spent money she shouldn't spend, didn't tell him about it. Somebody lied to somebody, whatever. Now trust has been broken. They come to my office and we're going to rebuild trust. Nobody knew what trust was. Communication. Now again, when we communicate, I've got to tell you the truth or it's not good to see how we know this word and we use this word and we handle this word.
Faith.
Faith is another word for.
You gotta have faith that you can trust it.
Right.
The unseen.
Time, the unseen. Everything you're saying is 100% right, but see how it's hard to get a handle on that? Because once you say that, some people go, yeah, you're right. Other people go, I don't know. This was a discovery that I had, and it's not a discovery I made, but it basically is the difference in selfish or selfless. That's it. The people that I trust are not selfish. And the people that I don't trust are selfish. The people that I trust are selfless. And the people that I don't trust aren't. If you want to know who you should trust, You get this visceral, back in the primitive part of your brain. God gave us 3 layers, a layer that works without thinking. I read Gavin DeBecker's book, The Gift of Fear. You have a vagal nerve complex that connects your head, your heart, and your stomach. And you get those gut feelings about people. That's a creep. I should. All those feelings are based on whether or not I think this person is selfish. You think about the person you trust most on the planet, and there's somebody you believe is not selfish, and you think that the person give you the creeps, and it's something in their behavior, something in their interaction, you get the idea, hey, this is a selfish person. Somebody asked me about my little truck. I've got a little Toyota Tacoma that I've driven since '06. It has 450,000 miles on it. My daughter said, Dad, you've got to quit driving that truck. It's dangerous. I said, well, 500,000 miles are a grandbaby. I got 3 grandbabies and bought a new truck. So I've got the 2018 Tactical Tacoma out in the road there, and I've got the one at home. Still running, never done anything to it. I put a coat of bed liner from the front bumper to the back bumper. $75 worth of spray on bed liner. But I still, my climbing partner, driving that truck today because his Hummer is in the shop and he's driving my truck. Well, when I thought I was going to have a new truck, you know who I called? The guys that sold me that truck. You know why? Because when I went to buy a truck, I went to a place in Huntsville that will remain nameless, Sarah Toyota. Bill Penny Toyota, I'm sorry. I went to there, and this young man met me, and he needed to sell a truck. So I'm looking for a Tacoma quad cab. Well, I've got a Ford Ranger. I'm looking for a Tacoma quad cab that's black. I got this blue Chevy. Now, the reason I need a quad cab is I carry crap in my truck. I ran a ropes course. Always got ropes. I'm a chaplain. I've got a Ninja Turtle vest and a skateboard helmet and all this stuff I have to have. And I told my wife, and she said, why do you need a quad cab? Nobody rides with you. I said, I need room in my truck to put stuff. She said, by the time you scoop the seat up, you'll have plenty of room. Again, she compromised on tall, dark, and handsome. Anyway, I got this guy in Huntsville who needs to sell a truck. And I drive over to Decatur, Sarah Toyota in Decatur, and this young man said, Mr. Jones, what do you need to do with this truck? Are you pulling a boat? Are you pulling a camper? Are you hauling wood? Are you hunting? Are you going to drive off-road? What kind of truck do you need? And he sold me the truck I needed, not because he needed to sell a truck. And when it came time to buy this new one, I called him and said, I need a black 4-door short bed Tacoma. I don't want a blue one, a green one, a purple one, an orange one. This is all I want. They called me the next day. I was sitting in a tree. My phone wiggled at 7:30. I said, leave me alone. Hey man, your truck's here. We got it ordered from Birmingham. I went over to get my truck. Young man said, now we need to orient you on your truck. I said, young man, I've been driving a truck longer than you've been alive. He goes, yeah, but the last time you bought a truck, we've invented stuff since then. So, fair point. But the difference in one guy's selfish, one guy's selfless. If I'm going to build a relationship, when we fight, when we make love, when we solve problems, when we raise kids, when we make decisions, if I'm selfish, you don't trust me. And if you don't trust me, this will never happen. If that never happens, it's going to be really, really hard for one of us to choose that.
Yeah, but when you have those 5, that's a bond.
Listen, when you have that,
That's a bond.
it's unbelievably strong. It's the difference between tying 2 things together and welding 2 things together. It's an alloy. You're changing the makeup to become one. It's not 2 people live in a house, it's just one entity, it's this bond that we're talking about. So when we begin to say, hey, what is this that we're supposed to do? I start with monitoring my behavior. I'm going to put your needs above my rights. And once I do that, I'm going to change the dynamic so that you trust me, and because we have this trust, there's intimacy, and the intimacy becomes love. Now, when you start thinking about the story of your marriage, you've got these extreme differences right here. And on a continuum, and a continuum is, how wide apart is that? Now, what happens when we get into negativity, we don't think there's a continuum. We only think about ideal or unacceptable. We don't think about the middle. You familiar with that? Your teenagers do that. It's called emotional dysregulation. That's why a teenager can think and upset themselves. In my world, that wall is ideal, this wall is unacceptable, and if I'm in the room, I'm happy. But a teenager says, if I couldn't go there, I couldn't go anywhere. If I didn't make an A, I made an F. If I'm not the starting pitcher, I shouldn't play ball at all. And they emotionally disregard. When we get unhappy in a marriage, we quit thinking about the good side of the continuum and only think about the bad side. So if you said, hey, this is the story of us, do you concentrate on the things that you celebrate or the things that you regret? Do you concentrate on affection or resentment? Do you remember the positive or the negative? Harmony versus chaos, satisfaction or disappointment? And really it boils down to us versus self. I meet a couple, I say, hey, tell me the story of you. And it's me, my, and mine. I already got a problem. And if they start talking, it's us, we, and our. I think we got something to work with. And in any organization, you will have illness or you will have wellness. And what's the difference in those two words? I versus we. I creates illness, we creates wellness. Now you're probably not going to be just 100% on this side because you're married to an imperfect person and you yourself are an imperfect person. And really in reality, you're not just going to be all the way over here. You choose where you camp out in this thing. And choosing to think about celebration, affection, positivity, harmony, satisfaction, and us is building, it's maturing, it's healing. Thinking about only this is a recipe for disaster. You're already walking out the door. You just don't know it yet. It's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when. You've had romance that turned in reality. The promise ran into a problem, and you're already decided to recycle. Have you thought about, hey, what would my life be like with this person? If I had married them instead of them. Well, when you start thinking in those kind of terms, anytime you compare reality with fantasy, what wins? Fantasy. And it's a dangerous place to go. But when we get tired enough, and we get hurt enough, and we get exhausted enough, and we fought enough, we tend to be able to drift over in here because it's easier to walk away when things are regretful, resentful, negative, chaotic, and disappointing, and I'm only thinking about me. But if you can modulate where you are on this scale and camp out over here attitudinally, you'll be a little better. Hey, is there anything I can talk about to celebrate today? Is there any way I can show this person affection as if? Is there any way I can have harmony even though? And can I decide to be satisfied with a struggling person who's trying? Or be satisfied with a person who's struggling because they're imperfect? And then can I make decisions based on us, not just on me? That's our introduction. So, any questions, any comments, anything that I need to clarify there?
It makes me think about, he said it years ago, and it's always stuck with me, and I used to think that, happy wife, happy life, but he's like, I've always hated that saying because it's not just about the wife. He said, and then I see the saying happy spouse, happy house, because it consists of the both of you. And I've always thought, and this is just my opinion, when you get a marriage where they're like, oh, we don't fight, we don't do this, we don't do that, like, well then one's given into the other 100% of the time then if you do not fight. Because if you're giving into that other one 100% of the time, of course you're not going to fight because you just cave and you do whatever.
But this is the magic of being selfless, is we're talking about give. If it's giving in or giving up or giving out, then we call those micro stuffs. I really do care where we eat. I just don't debate it. Now in my world, I don't care. I can say chicken in 9 languages. I'm very I have an unsophisticated palate. I go in and say, what's the Greek word for chicken? What's the German word for chicken? What's the Italian word for chicken? What's the Mexican word for chicken? I don't want the chicken. I'm good to go. Now, if you're giving in, giving up, or giving out, you're also keeping score. And you're keeping score because you think you're losing. And there are places where the other person is just that easy to get along with. They're rare people. My dad's that guy. I mean, he just is. He's 87 now. And we hunt together. We didn't hunt last year, but we got hunt, they come up every year on the opening day gun season. And, Jackie fixes a big pot of soup, and then we come in from the woods, and they go shopping, and we come on it. And so we're going to Kill Mountain, place I hunt. We get out, the girls are in town. I said, Dad, Jackie's got soup at home, or we can drop off the backside of the mountain to Miller's Barbecue. We get some barbecue, we have soup. He goes, all the same to you, let's eat some barbecue. I don't really like soup. I said, Dad, you've eaten soup at my house for the last 10 years. I wouldn't do nothing to hurt Jackie's feelings. That's my dad is, okay? And so, but he's a giver. He's never treated Mom like I give in or give up. And I do believe there are couples that don't have that many conflicts. But if you're giving and it's giving in or giving out or giving up, it's toxic. Men who cheat sexually, compulsively, like sexual addiction, hookers, pornography, lap dances, that kind of stuff, they're clean cut, medium-sized built, usually wear white shirts with ties, and they're nice, meek men. But they will tell you their life is a series of stuffs. And when they reach their boiling point, they act out sexually with random strangers. It's really strange phenomenon. It's almost like the serial killer who is killing his mom every other weekend because he took all this stuff from her. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's got to be giving. Well, Paul says it about contribution. It can't be a necessity or compulsion. God loves a cheerful giver. If you're giving to your spouse because you love them, that's one thing. If you're giving to your spouse to avoid the fight or to make peace, that's a necessity and compulsion. That's not a good formula. Cool? All right, I hear people rummaging around. I've gone past what I said I'd go. So we'll come back and do a second session based on this concept here. And then tomorrow we'll talk about the building blocks of relationship, and we'll talk about the 4 horsemen of the relationship apocalypse if we have time. Cool? Thank you guys. Somebody want to bless the food while we're all together?
Well, we got
kids.
let's do it in there.
We've got the kids in the other room.
Okay.
So we'll bless them when we get in the.
Okay, all right, good deal.
Thank
you, guys.
We got some helpers in there too, so thank you for the time. Came to help set up.